I just want to say at the beginning that although I've been working in technology for 25 years now, I don't think it's the answer to everything. So I'm not going to stand up here and say that we can solve all the problems with it. There's good and bad uses of it, and there's right and wrong uses of it. And I struggled with that issue the whole time myself, so bear with me on that. This is me as a child. As you would have heard, I'm actually the second from the right. I grew up on Jersey, so I was very fortunate to have Gerald Durrell's zoo on my doorstep. Was also very fortunate to watch lots of David Attenborough programs. And also my grandparents were very, very keen amateur naturalists, and my mother also. So kind of grew up in a very rich environment, and Jersey's a beautiful place to go and explore, without a doubt. I found myself getting into development issues after a long career in IT, after going to Africa in '93 and helping to build a school, and got really, really interested in how I could turn my technology skills into something that was more useful than just working in a finance industry or making somebody rich. So I've really spent, I suppose, the last sort of 17 years since that first trip trying to understand how technology can be used out in the field, but also thinking about how it could be used in places like the UK, back at home, to promote conservation and other things among non-profits and people who are interested in the message that they have. I think to coin some phrases from conservation, I think that for me there's two sides of this. We live in two technology worlds, and for those of you who have been in developing countries at all recently and seen mobile phones, it might be a huge surprise that there are mobile phones in all these places. You'd never expect to see them. But second, a lot of them are very old phones. They're not very smart, they're not very clever, they can do voice and SMS, and they're the kind of phone you see on the left. For us, it's more about these smartphones. You can do fancy stuff, and you can do video, and you can upload to the web, and you can watch YouTube and do all this kind of thing. I'm going to start with the first one. My mobile work started here. This is Bushbuck Ridge in South Africa. It's an area that straddles the southeast side of Kruger National Park. There's about 20 or 25 villages. These communities were kicked out of the park when it was created in the 1920s, and nobody has spoken to them really since. And that's kind of the story of national park creation in many developing countries, sadly. And people realize now it's not really a good way of doing conservation. But the parks authorities were trying to figure out how they could start to talk to these people again. And they were starting to own phones. And this was 2003, so it was very, very early on. Mobiles for development, which is the kind of space we call it, it's only been around probably about 8 years. So this was really at that very early point. But the challenge for me became very clear, and it was very obvious that many non-profits working in these places, whether it was conservation, human rights, agriculture, election monitoring, human rights abuse reporting, or whatever, were all going through the same problems. What the parks wanted to do was to really tell the communities about meetings, to solicit opinions, tell them plans for the park, and also give them things like alerts when elephants broke the fence. Fairly standard stuff. The problem was no technology worked in Kruger National Park. Everything I found worked off the internet. You couldn't get on the internet. It was all too expensive, it was all too technical, and it really, really failed on those accounts. So I developed some software called Frontline SMS. Now, I normally talk for half an hour about this. I'm not going to do that today. So to very quickly tell you, it's just a piece of software you download onto a very low-cost laptop, and you plug in a phone with a cable, and that becomes your communication device. You can then take that out into the field and use it to send text messages to groups of people, whether they be around the park or whether they be healthcare workers or whatever it might be. Since it was released in 2005, it's now in use in over 60 countries, and it's been quite an amazing story for me to really show that if you build tools that work in the places where they need to work, then people will actually adopt them. It's been used for a whole bunch of things here. Among them has been conservation, so uses such as helping people harvest non-timber forest products, through to elephant breakages in fences, and then there's just one example from Australia which I quite like. The Venus Bay Observation Project is encouraging members of the public when they see dead birds or erosion on the beach or anything that they want to report to text in their observation, and they can map that. So it's kind of a citizen science. It's a way of allowing members of the public who are strolling around the beach to really engage in a project, and these are pictures obviously someone's taken of dead birds that have arrived up on the beach for some reason. The other sort of side of that, the flip side, is really how you build stuff closer to home on higher end devices. The stuff that we have, iPhones, Blackberries, kind of gaming phones. This is a project I worked on with Fauna and Flora International in 2003. The amazing thing is, even though it was 7 years ago, it's still actually a very, very groundbreaking project, and it's still a very good example of what you can do with high-end devices if you want to try and connect people with conservation. So what they wanted to do was really sell wallpapers and ringtones, and create games, specific conservation-themed games, and give live field diaries and so on from the field to the consumer. So Debbie Marta, who works on tiger conservation in Sumatra, was writing live diaries you could read on your phone, which was kind of nice because it gave you a nice sort of connection feel with the projects. These are samples of some of the wallpapers. FFI have a great photographer, as many international conservation organizations do, and these pictures sold incredibly well. We licensed 22 ringtones from the British Library that have all these animal sounds on tape, which you can digitize and then sell as ringtones. They were also hugely popular. And on the game side, this is a game called Silverback. It takes you through over 8 levels, all the threats to gorillas in the wild. And it's peppered with little information screens. It tells you about gorilla diet and gorilla habitat and social behavior and all these kinds of things. So as you're playing, you're learning, but you're learning in a kind of subliminal way. And at the end of the game, there's links you can go to read more about gorilla conservation. You can compare scores with other people. It was actually a great game. And the interesting thing for us was that in the commercial mobile press, it got very high reviews, even though it was a conservation game, which they could have said was great because it was conservation, but as a game, it was rubbish. They actually liked it. And you can actually still get this game. I'll show you a link in a second. 3 years ago, some gorillas died or got murdered or killed in the DRC, and it hit the news. And we actually re-released the game on a site called silverbackers.org. So you can actually still get the game if you go to silverbackers.org. And it is a great game, so I thoroughly recommend it. We also did a Tamagotchi thing where you could take an animal and you could learn about it and look after it, and like a sort of zoo animal, which Tamagotchi pets are still very popular on mobile phones. Another one where you uncover a picture of a wild animal, and as you do so, you're basically being chased around by threats to the animal in the wild. So the tiger game or the tiger level, you're being chased by poachers and you're trying to avoid snares. On the leatherback turtle one, you're trying to avoid long-line fish hooks and plastic bags. So again, you're kind of learning about these threats and learning about the threats and the problems that turtles have in the wild as you play a game. So you're not really aware that you're learning, but you are learning. And we had a quiz, which was fantastic to take to conservation-themed conferences and take to the bar late in the evening and get some smart people to try and see how many questions they could get right. And this was a very, very fun game as well, and obviously more educational because you can see the theme around the quiz. Of course, it's one thing, though, teaching people about projects or conservation that's far, far away from home if you're thinking about the UK. It's another thing getting people to act on something. And one of I think the strong themes that comes out of a lot of the work that I do and the conferences I go to is that awareness raising is not action. Action is action. And we always talk about awareness raising. We need to raise awareness around the plight of X, Y, and Z, or whatever it might be. It doesn't necessarily lead to any action, though, if people just know about something. I think social media's got us to a point where we feel we just have to join a Facebook group to support gorilla conservation. That's all we have to do. And of course, joining a Facebook group actually doesn't do very much unless 25 million other people do it, and you can then lobby it in some way. Project Noah is a project I came across recently when I was doing some work at PopTech, which was about 2 weeks ago, and also National Geographic are involved. And it's an iPhone app that basically, some of you may know this, and there may be similar things around. But the idea is that children in particular take this phone out into the wild and they take pictures of things that they see, and they can geotag them and make little notes, and they can upload it to a website. They get badges. So those of you who know Foursquare or use Foursquare, where people get badges for visiting, if you visit 10 cafes, you get a badge. It's all kind of weird. But this is a little bit better than that. So if you see a certain number of birds, you get the bird badge. You can get the tadpole badge for fish and so on. There's a sort of National Geographic one as well. So by using this, you're encouraging people actually not just to sit and play a game, but you're encouraging them to take their phone, go out into the field and actually take pictures of butterflies and get a little bit more interested. And then they all get uploaded to a website where you can see what else is going on. Actually, what's interesting in the picture here is that there's a little section on called My Missions. You can actually join a mission. If someone's doing a study of fungi in the UK or migrating birds, you can set up a mission and you can actually join it and actually start to input data along with other kids in the country. So you can kind of join this sort of large sort of citizen science growing movement, which I think is quite interesting. And that's the details there for Project Noah if anyone's interested, and I know Yasser well. I think it's kind of where we're going, I think, with this. Whether or not we like having kids with phones, of course we'd like to have kids out climbing trees and running around getting muddy, but the reality in many cases is they don't do that, but they have phones. So I think we have to make the best of that and try to think of these kinds of things that might be a sort of a happy halfway house. On the Facebook side, it's interesting that in developing countries as well as here, it's actually a very, very big movement towards Facebook and Facebook groups. Facebook have a site in many developing countries called Facebook Zero, which is actually free to access on a mobile phone. So you don't pay any data charges. Nigeria, Facebook is growing hugely. It's a big market of 130 million people anyway. But Facebook realized that people can't afford necessarily to spend money accessing sites. So they've made it free to access Facebook. And of course, their users have shot right up. If you've got a Facebook group, it can be accessed by people in developing countries as well as people in the UK if you're thinking about trying to bridge an international issue with people back home and vice versa. And of course, I'll end on this because it's pretty much bang on time now, my 12 minutes. But of course, the iPad's a fairly new release, and it's sort of shaken up the publishing world to a large degree. National Geographic now have their magazine available on it. The Times now publish on it. I think as a consumption device, for those of you who have played with one in an Apple store, I mean, they're pretty stunning, and they've sort of reshaped how we think about how we consume things electronically. It's just like holding an iPhone about an inch from your face, basically. And maybe it's cheaper just to hold your iPhone here as well. But I think what this is allowing organizations now to do when they're thinking about the message they're trying to share is that there's all these very, very intuitive, interactive devices out there. It presents many, many opportunities. These are just a few of the sort of social media sites that you can really get into. And I think when conservation organizations in particular, and many NGOs that I work with, they think about all the technology mixes of all the different bits of hardware out there. They think about all the different services, think about Facebook and Twitter. And it's really quite daunting to figure out really what you can do with those things. I don't know how many people in this room are actually on Twitter. I couldn't find anybody when I was tweeting this. Oh, okay, I have a couple. That's good. See, it's not many, is it? But I think at the same time, we need to remember that not everyone's on Twitter, and it's a useful channel, but it won't actually change the world. And I think I'll sort of leave on that note that I think these tools are great for awareness raising, but I think we really need to challenge ourselves to get people to take that step from being aware to actually doing something. And I've spent a long time trying to solve that, and I haven't yet seen any real answers. But I think if we can crack it, then there's massive opportunities out there, especially if we use these kinds of devices. So sorry that was fast, but it had to be. And that's me done. Thanks.